Us. Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois. And welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can communicate with me directly by typing your question or comment directly on whatever platform you happen to be watching on. It will show up here in my chat room and we can communicate directly. As you know, I have been asking people what they would like for me to talk about, um, which is not to say that I won't continue to choose subjects myself, but I am interested in what people would like to talk about. And some of the suggestions included our subject yesterday, talking about Jupiter retrograde and also other retrogrades. And also, we had a question for doing some shows about how to read tarot. Not what is tarot, but how to read tarot. Um, so we're going to work with that today. And hello to Gwendolyn, who gives us blessings from Idaho. It's good to see you, Gwendolyn. And as you know, if you watch me when I appear on Tarot Thursdays here on Pagan World TV or other times, I commonly use this deck, my deck, the Tarot of Hecate, which is my own design. If I can get the cards to where they'll show. And I commonly read with that. And hello to Moondog Magic from Central Florida. It's good to see you, Moondog Magic. And there's a little photo that I assume shows the dog. Um, and hello to Kazan in the chat room. It's good to see you. However, the Tarot of Hecate is a very eccentric tarot. It has 100 cards. It has extra major arcana cards and a full extra minor arcana suit. So talking generally about tarot, it can be easily transformed into a standard tarot deck by removing those excess cards, but I thought today I would bring out this deck. And this is called the Hoi Polloi Tarot. And this was the very first tarot I ever owned. And you can see that it's basically a Rider-Waite clone, but it has a very interesting style that to me is reminiscent of stained glass, even if not exactly. And I've always quite liked the style. It dates from the early 70s. It was apparently published in 1972. I think I got it in 73. Um, and hello, you're live on the air. Can I help you? Who are you? I'm sorry, but I'm live on the air at the moment. I can't take a phone call, but if you'd like to call back later, we could perhaps talk. Thank you. Sorry about that. Um, what exactly made them think this was a good time for a call? I don't know, but I'm perfectly willing to put you on the air if you choose to call at noon and you're labeled as a spam risk. Um, and where were we? We were talking about the Hoi Polloi Tarot. And it was the very first tarot deck I ever owned. I got it, I believe, in 1973. Could possibly have been early 1974. It was a long, long time ago. It was a gift from my mother, who was all for my learning to play tarot or to read tarot cards, and we also would play tarot cards together. And if you don't know what I mean by that, in addition to being used for divination, tarot is also used for playing certain card games that are quite ancient, such as Turok, which my mother and I used to play. Um, and for the tarot reader, something like Turok can be helpful in learning to understand the meaning of the cards if you use it in that way. Um, In the United States, I don't think there are many people who use tarot as playing cards. In Europe, that is still, I believe, their primary use. And I've heard some people from Europe get upset at the idea of tarot being used for divination because they're only familiar with it for um, use in card playing. But in the United States, it's almost entirely used for divination, and its use for divination goes back a very long way. Just as what we would think of as ordinary playing cards have been used for divination for pretty much their whole history, too. Um, prior to, I would say, the 1960s, playing cards, the kind of cards you would use for an ordinary card game, were the most commonly used cards for divination. And if you went to get your cards read, that's probably what the person would be reading. Tarot cards were used by a minority of people, at least in this country, and were not easily obtained here at that time because they were more of a European thing. In the 20th century, particularly in the 60s, they gained a great deal more currency here. And it was the Rider Waite deck that caused most of that currency. They had, of course, been used in metaphysical circles well before that, even in this country, um, but in limited amounts. It was US Games who decided to mass market tarot in this country, and they chose to use the Rider Waite, I believe because it was the easiest one to publish because of the way that it was created, as well as being quite attractive. The Rider Waite or Rider Waite Smith was created by the artist Pamela Coleman Smith. Um, and for most people, it is still the de facto deck, but they don't realize A, it's not a traditional tarot, it's a very revolutionary tarot. And two, it is of relatively recent provenance in most people's experience. And that provenance, we're just going to turn that off. And that one is someone who knows perfectly well I'm on the air. Um, that's interesting. I guess I need to turn the phone off before I come on. But that's weird because most days it never goes off when I'm on the air. It's rather odd, but today has been an odd day. There have been a number of perfectly reasonable but not ordinary occurrences today. You may be having an odd day too, but this is part of life. But it was U.S. Games who made the Rider Waite Smith tarot the dominant um, tarot in the United States, certainly. Now, Kazan asks Kazan is curious what made me decide to make the Hecate tarot cards, and the answer to that is Lady Bitterwind. She felt, and this is early 1980s, she felt that the art that I was doing, she was a tarot reader for many years at that time, and she felt that the art that I was doing was highly symbolic, which I mean, it was meant to be, and that it would make excellent tarot cards. And she started to really lobby me heavily to do a tarot deck. Not only was she lobbying me heavily to do a tarot deck, but she had a very distinct idea of what she wanted that deck to be. And she wanted to be 100 cards in total. Um, and this was because she felt it was numerologically more appropriate. And also, it was influenced by the writings, I believe, of Piers Anthony. And she had an idea of what she thought the extra cards should be, and we ultimately followed those ideas in creating the deck in the 1980s. Um, it took her a while to convince me to do this because I had no desire on earth to do a tarot deck at first. I was familiar with tarot because, as I just said, I'd been working with tarot for, well, since childhood. But it wasn't really a thing for me at that point in my life. But I would have to say that I really became enthused with tarot and skilled with tarot by creating my own tarot. And I think it actually is a wonderful exercise if you would like to come to understand the meaning of the cards, learning how to interpret them in your own symbols. One requires you to understand them and then to interpret them. And when you've done it for yourself, it takes on a whole new meaning. So it was quite a fascinating journey once I agreed to go on it. And if you look at the Tarot of Hecate, if you look at the early cards of the major arcana, the Magus, the High Priestess, the Hierophant, these were all existing artworks that I had done for pagan magazines prior to starting this deck. They were pieces that Lady Bitterwind picked as being ideal for these cards, and they showed the kind of artwork I was doing. The later cards were done just for the deck, and in some cases, um, that is very obvious, the difference in these cards. In other cases, it's not. Uh, the um, the Chariot card, which shows basically George and the Dragon, or earlier versions of that story, um, was one that I did beforehand. I thought it was perfect for the Chariot. Lady Bitterwind did not like it for the Chariot because there's no chariot in it, but I thought that it spoke well to the meaning of the cards. And a lot of people have had, well, a few people have had that criticism of the Tarot of Hecate, that it is not as over your head with some of its symbolism as maybe that's not the word I want to use, as it doesn't hit you in the head with some of its symbolism the way some tarots do. For example, if you look at the pip cards in the minor arcana, there are not multiple chalices or multiple wands or multiple swords, because it says right on the bottom it's the two of swords, it's the three of swords, it's the four of swords. You don't need to have four swords for people to figure that out. It says it. So I did not include that in the drawings. I didn't think it was necessary. One of the things that made the Rider-Waite tarot unique and revolutionary was giving illustrations to the pip cards, and I wanted to follow that idea of making them full illustrations. Prior to the Rider-Waite, um, all tarot decks, to the best of my knowledge, the pip cards in the minor arcana were done the same as playing cards. It was two, three, four, five, however many of whatever the subject of that suit was. Only the court cards had illustrations. The Rider-Waite Smith deck changed that, and I think it was a very good change. I think that, but it is also a matter of opinion. Some people might say that. I would say that having more artistic inspiration in those cards helps you to interpret them, but other people might feel it's better to work with less. And that's a matter of personal taste. I've also seen decks that split that difference. There was a lovely deck called the Ukiyo-e deck that I used to own. I don't think I still have it. It used Japanese ukiyo-e art as its inspiration, and its pip cards did have however many of whatever suit it was, but they were all different. They were all highly artistic, and that was pretty cool. But there are many ways to do this. So when you choose a deck, and I suppose that's the place to start talking about how to read tarot, choosing your deck, you want to choose one that works for you, one that appeals to you. It doesn't matter if it's going to work for someone else. It only matters if it's going to work for you. A lot of people do like to start with various clones of the Rider-Waite Smith, which most tarot decks available are clones of the Rider-Waite Smith. And I guess if you are in the point where you're learning from books, most books are going to address that deck. And again, the reason is US games. No other reason. It's kind of like the green-faced witch. You see all kinds of nonsense about the origins of the green-faced Halloween witch, including the idea it has something to do with the witch hunts, which is absolute nonsense. It has to do only with Margaret Hamilton in The Wizard of Oz. There was no green-faced witch anywhere um, prior to The Wizard of Oz. And afterwards, it was everywhere. And the only reason they gave her green skin was that they were doing it in Technicolor, and they really wanted to show the power of Technicolor in a world that was used to black and white. With the Rider-Waite, again, it's not a traditional tarot. It's a revolutionary tarot from the beginning of the 20th century, but it's become dominant because it was chosen by US Games and then also chosen by Eden Gray. Eden Gray did in literature what US Games did in physicality. They mass produced the tarot cards and she wrote about them. And in the 1960s and 70s, if you're going to buy a book on tarot, it was almost certainly written by Eden Gray. And she chose the Rider-Waite-Smith deck as the deck that she was going to speak about because US Games had mass produced it and it was the most easily available. At that time, and I'm old enough to remember that time, there were only 3 tarot decks easily available. The Marseille Tarot, which is very traditional, the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, which was quite revolutionary, and the Tarot of Thoth by Aleister Crowley and Lady Frida Harris, which was also quite revolutionary. It's only later we've had the wide range of different kinds of tarot decks that you can buy. Now, there certainly were other decks in existence, but they were not widely available in this country. And I don't know that they really started to become widely available elsewhere until that era. One of the things that may have struck you in looking at tarot decks is some of them seem to be arranged around artistic subjects that don't seem to have any relevance to metaphysics. And that's because, again, they're widely used as playing cards in the rest of the world, where they're often collected for their artistic themes, which aren't expected to have anything to do with metaphysics necessarily. And that's how you get things like the Tarot of the Gnomes and lots of others that come from places like Italy, where they may be used for divination, but are just as likely to be used simply to play cards and are collected for their artwork. Now, if you're going to read them, which is our ostensive subject in this next couple of shows, what do you need to know? Well, the first thing you need to know is to take them seriously. And this is true for any kind of psychic work or magical work you're going to do. If you're not going to take it seriously, it's better not to do it, in my opinion. At least, generally speaking. You know, I often talk about a radio show I did for telepathic radio many years ago. They brought myself and Howard Heim to talk about the Ouija board. And the show is called Ouija Board, Psychic Tool or Gateway to Hell, 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 Hell. And I always remember that introduction because I recorded it for them. And of course, I took the point of view that it was a psychic tool. And Howard Heim took the point of view that it was a gateway to hell, hell, hell. And he told the story of a group of frat boys who got drunk and took their Ouija board to a graveyard looking for a spooky experience and then were surprised that they got one. No matter what you're doing, psychically or magically, you need to do it with the right intent if you want to get the right result. If you're using it as a spiritual tool and you do the things that you should do, cleansing, releasing, psychic hygiene, shielding, etc., you should get a good result. And that's true for tarot as well as everything else. If you're treating it as a game, that's probably the level of result you're going to get. So if you're going to read tarot, read it seriously, and also follow the same advice I give for all psychic reading. When you first begin, do not expect spectacular results. You need to practice a bit, and you'll get better results. The first time, you might not. But like everything else, practice makes perfect. So with tarot cards, my advice is if you want to read them, begin simply and work up. And if you do that, Um, I think you'll have very good results. You want to always clear and release excess energy before you begin. Um, you want to practice good psychic hygiene in whatever area you're working in. You may want to say a little prayer before you begin, asking deity or whatever you call whatever higher power you may or may not work with, even if it's only your own higher self. Ask for assistance in getting good answers. Focus yourself. These things will all be helpful. And then what you want to do is you want to shuffle the cards. And the way that I shuffle cards is like this. Some people like to do the fan shuffle, but tarot cards tend to be relatively large and they don't always work well with a fan shuffle. Plus, it can be bad sometimes for the cards themselves because it's more wearing. So I always do this kind of straight shuffle. You want to get them good and confused. You don't want to be thinking about anything particular while you're shuffling, except for the question you're going to ask if you're asking a question. And then you want to draw the cards, and there are different ways to draw cards. Some people like to use spreads. The most popular spread is the Celtic Cross. Why is the Celtic Cross the more popular spread? All the same reasons we just talked about. US Games, Eden Gray, other writers of that era. I don't know that it was particularly popular earlier, but it certainly is today. But then some people like myself just draw cards. I draw 3 at a time as a general rule, and I don't use spreads for the most part. If I'm doing a year-long reading, I might um, use a spread for exactly that purpose. But generally, I don't. I don't find them particularly helpful. But when I was learning, I did use lots of different spreads, so you may wish to too. But let's draw 3 cards and just see what they have to say. First card is the Knight of Swords. The Knight of Swords is self-interest. With the Knight of Swords, as I understand the Knight of Swords, it means that you want to make sure in the situation you're in that you are getting what you need from it. This is because um, other things may be trying to take away from you in that situation. When I started reading, I used a more common understanding that this represented unhealthy self-interest, but I came to find that that's not how it was showing up for the people I was reading for, and that it meant that they needed to have more self-interest. So that's how I read it. You may find also that as you read, things take on a different meaning for you than what they may have had for people whose books you've read. With that, we have the Eight of Swords. Um, and these cards do have a certain amount of green in them, which is dropping out. But the Eight of Swords is feeling held back or confined by circumstances, which would be the reason for healthy self-interest, to break through that feeling of being held back. And then our third card will be Judgment, which is getting what you've worked for. So it's saying don't let outside interest hold you back. Make sure you're getting what you need and you'll be happy with the result. That's a very simple tarot reading, a very simple way to do a tarot reading. It doesn't need to be any more than that. Although, if I were actually doing a reading for a person, I would most likely not stop with 3 cards. I would go through however many we needed to get however much information was relevant to what they wanted to know. Now, as we read those cards, as I was saying, there is a major arcana, and the major arcana, and of course I do not have the cards separated, but here we have the Empress. She is one of the major arcana. Hello to Brian in the chat room. Hello to Kathy in the chat room. Good to see you both. The major arcana are generally considered to deal with higher spiritual and cosmic issues. Well, you read them basically the same, but they're considered to carry a little more weight than the minor arcana. The minor arcana are divided into 4 suits. There's the suit of swords. There is the suit of pentacles, coins, or whatever you want to call them. The suit of wands. And the last one is the suit of cups, but they're not giving me a cup. But each of these has its own distinct meaning. Cups are generally romance and relationships. Pentacles are money and prosperity. Wands are things that you're passionate about, often business, but not necessarily. Um, and swords, depending on how you're reading, some people read it as difficulties. Um, some people would read it as challenges, but it's the things that involve more challenge, more struggle. And hello to Jean in the chat room. It's good to see you. And Jean says, "Hello, I enjoy your shows. I just discovered you 2 days ago." Thank you, Jean. I'm glad to have you here. Um, each of these different suits has its own meaning, and of course, each different card within it has a variation on that meaning. And to read them properly, you need to know those variations. Now, some people just go by the artwork. They don't memorize the meanings. They go by what it says to them in that moment. I'm not one of those people. But that's a perfectly legitimate form of reading. Many people do read tarot that way. I was one of those people who memorized all the meanings and then allowed them to take the shape that they carried for me, which was not always what I originally learned. Hello to Mermaid in the chat room. It's good to see you. I think it's very important to let them take the meaning they're going to have for you, but you only discover that through experience. And again, the way you learn this is through practice. And tomorrow we will talk more about actual reading and some of the things you have to bear in mind when reading with other people or for yourself. Many people believe you should not read for yourself. I'm not one of them. But I will say that when you first begin, it's best not to take too seriously what you get for yourself because you don't necessarily have enough distance from your own situations to be able to interpret a good answer. And Mermaid says, tarot cards are like shoes. You can never really have too many decks. A lot of people do believe that. Um, Many years ago, when I was working in the psychic fairs, I often would have at least four decks on my table, and I would let the client choose which deck they wanted, and each one had a different meaning for me. And I would take that to be the very first part of the reading, which deck they chose, um, because each deck was so different. And I think having many different tarot decks is a desirable thing, if only to see just how different they can be. Um, and The diversity today is incredible. And you could find virtually whatever you needed to light your creative fire as a reader in some form of tarot deck or an oracle deck. And we'll talk about oracle decks probably in the next day or so. But with that, I see that we've come to the end of our half hour. I want to thank you for joining me. And let us close with our prayer, as we normally do. And I will see you tomorrow with my phone turned off. And I hope that you have a lovely day. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to find those things that have meaning for us in our lives. Help us to find the things that help us to interpret your messages in our lives, whether it's tarot cards or something else. Help us to be mindful of the fact that everything in life, in its way, is a prayer, and everything in life in its way is a divination. And if we are mindful, your messages are constant. Beloved Mother God, yes, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for your constant presence in our lives. But from respect, knowing you are always here, still, we thank you for your presence and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I will see you tomorrow. Oh, and hello to George in the chat room. It's good to see you.